Hello, I'm Charlie Smith from the Architecture programme at Liverpool John Moores University. This presentation discusses how libraries are an integral part of the public realm and explores two key issues which relate to this conception of library spaces. Deep cuts to public spending have resulted in the closure of hundreds of libraries across the UK. Whilst many concerns have been voiced, these closures are not generally conceptualised in terms of how the community they served loses a unique part of its public realm. At the same time, the nature of the library environments that remain has been evolving. They are becoming much more informal places that increase the opportunities for, and the nature of, public engagement and potential interactions occurring between their visitors. The presentation goes on to discuss how reframing the library as an alternative form of indoor public space suggests that principles relating to urban design and to placemaking can be applied to library spaces in order to enhance their role as a public meeting place. A recent study analysing different reasons for upholding a public library service found that legitimations related to libraries' role as a meeting place and as an arena for public discourse were ranked as the two least important justifications for public library provision. Interestingly, however, when evaluating the actual use of libraries, the same study found that they do act as a community square meeting place, in which users bump into friends and neighbours, visit the cafe, and meet new people, even though its role was not perceived as such. Research has shown that the majority of public library users do not actually borrow or return library materials during a visit. In their study of the use of library spaces, Arbo and Audenson observed a complex range of activities, but which included low-intensive conduct that is characteristic of activities which take place within the public realm. One feature of places where such low-intensity meeting occurs is an exposure to otherness, people representing different values, cultures, and interests. Arguably, this is something synonymous with the plurality of the public realm. In another study, library users described them as a safe place, one that is inclusive of diverse backgrounds, cultures, and generations, which provide opportunities to socialise and develop friendships. Like urban squares and parks, libraries are public spaces where differences in socio-economic status become invisible. It is in these interpretations of the library as an indoor public square, providing for a rich variety of informal meetings and activities in an inclusive context of plurality and openness. It is argued here that the library constitutes a unique part of the public realm. However, over the last decade, it is one that has become eroded. An underexplored consequence of library closures and transfers is the impact on the public space. As libraries close, the community they served loses a unique and distinct part of its public domain. Figures reported by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy reveal the loss of 864 library service points between 2010 and 2018. This is a reduction of almost 20%. Given the high proportion of branch libraries that have either closed or been transferred from local authority control, let us assume a relatively modest typical floor area for a library of around 500 square metres. This is an area comparable to Walton, Fazakerley and Kensington branch libraries in Liverpool, for example. Multiplied across the reduction of library service points over the last 8 years, this would equate to a total loss of approximately 50 hectares of public space. To put that into context, in terms of conceptualising such closures as diminishing public realm, it is the equivalent of more than 35 Trafalgar Squares. In just the single year 2018, the CIPFA identify a net loss of 127 library service points. Assuming the same typical floor area, this would equate to more than 6 hectares of lost public realm, an area 4 times that of Rome's Piazza Navona in just 1 year. If we conceptualise libraries as an agora for their communities, this startling loss of public space is a significant additional dimension to library closures than their community's loss of access to books, information and IT facilities. However, it is not the only way in which public realm is being diminished through changes in the landscape of library provision. Strategies of transferring libraries to be run by community organisations, volunteer groups or the private sector still constitutes fragmentation of an already diminishing truly public places, and arguably can result in libraries losing their status as a public space. In London, the authorities of Ealing, Croydon and Harrow, the private sector company Carillion ran the library services from 2013 until the firm collapsed in January 2018. There are similar arrangements in the USA, Sweden and the Netherlands. It can be argued that this constitutes an additional dimension to the already established trend of the privatisation of the public realm within the urban environment. In London, for example, the open spaces on the River Thames South Bank around City Hall, Granary Square at King's Cross, and Paternoster Square behind St Paul's Cathedral are all privately owned public spaces, or POPs. POPs include private spaces developed for public use, but also existing public spaces that have been adopted by private sector bodies, therefore not dissimilar to public libraries being adopted by private sector companies. They have been criticised as corporately controlled spaces, which challenge free movement and liberties and remove public spaces from the urban commons. These are all criticisms that have been levelled at these pseudo-public spaces. They are certainly not traits that one would associate with the ideology of the contemporary public library. There is an established trend towards greater informality in libraries. What was traditionally a formal civic building, in both an architectural sense and in the way in which users occupied it, has gradually transformed by the presence of ever more casual spaces. For example, in the refurbished central libraries of both Manchester and Liverpool, the visitor is greeted first by a coffee shop. Though many libraries have cafes, positioning them as the first space that users encounter epitomises the extent to which cafe culture is infiltrating libraries. Libraries are becoming a new civic living room of the towns and cities in which they are located. Their informal spaces include sofas, terrace seating, beanbags, bar stools, landscaped roof gardens, and armchairs clustered around coffee tables. Libraries have been described as communal territories that encourage social interaction, conversation, and a mood of playfulness. A public place that facilitates both non-committal, accidental meetings, as well as more structured gatherings. This informalisation of the library and the notion of the library as an urban living room are concepts that saw an early incarnation at Seattle Public Library. A space termed the living room is placed at the entrance level, which has been described as both a public space for the community and as a living room for visitors and inhabitants of the city, in which to meet, socialise, or just relax. A study of users and passers-by found that the library is considered as a social place, providing opportunities for people to interact across the generations and plays an important role as a meeting place. The Story House in Chester is a hybrid civic building comprising of a theatre, cinema, restaurant and a city library. The project sought to reinvent the way a city library is perceived and used. The bookshelves are distributed throughout the interior, including in both the restaurant and the theatre bar. And the seating is characterised as much by armchairs and coffee tables as it is by workstations and desks. The OBA library in Amsterdam also embodies the concept of an urban lounge. Its sense of place as a meeting point starts on the plaza in front of the library, and it extends throughout the inside, where there is a rich diversity of places to sit, gather and socialise, including both a restaurant and a cafe, right the way up to the roof terrace overlooking the city. As the public library has become more informal through its architectural and interior design, the increasingly relaxed nature of spaces is altering the way people occupy them. This is changing both the opportunities for, and the nature of, potential interactions occurring between their users, and their learning potential as facilitated through a richer diversity of conversational possibilities. A Danish study exploring the roles of public libraries in urban design and cultural planning found that public library projects are significant influencers in placemaking through playing an active part in urban planning and creating public domain. This aligns with observations of how public libraries have become an integral part of both inner city and neighbourhood regeneration over the last decade. Libraries can also embody the concept of being an extension of the public realm through how they enfold surrounding external public spaces. In Birmingham, the library spreads out beneath the public square in front of it. A void cut into this square creates sightlines down into the library spaces below, thereby engaging both passers-by and library users even before they enter the building. At Peckham Library in London, the main elements of the library have been elevated to create a sheltered outdoor space beneath the building. This is both a space in between being inside the library and outside, and an integral part of the Peckham Square surrounding it. An accessible alternative to the seminal informal gathering space of the steps to the New York Public Library. At the central branch of Vancouver Public Library, a covered concourse extends off the surrounding piazza, providing an entry foyer to the library and accommodating lively pedestrian activities, shops and cafes at ground level. This creates an interstitial zone that expands the library space beyond its conventional boundaries and blurs the distinction between being in the library and the surrounding outdoor public domain. The attention shown towards civic space surrounding the library and the role libraries play in urban design and regeneration should be conceptualised as extending into and throughout the library itself. An interplay between interior and exterior aspects of the public realm has always been a feature of library design. However, this can be explored further, creating new opportunities and interpretations for the library as a meeting place and a gathering space, and extending the public domain into the library itself. In this regard, the design of libraries can embrace principles of urban design and planning, such as creating a sense of place and providing places to gather, pause and linger in informal democratic spaces. Just as the public realm offers both hard landscaped squares and soft landscaped parks, so should libraries have a rich diversity of interior and interstitial spaces. Such spaces can be created at a variety of scales, from the civic to the intimate, provide for both planned and unexpected activities, embody a multitude of atmospheres, from the serene to the bustling, provide different degrees of enclosure and sanctuary, and thereby facilitate gathering and human interaction in a diverse range of forms. For example, a playful cascade of amphitheatre seating creates a casual meeting space that spans between floors at the De Crook Library in Ghent. This is a device sometimes used in urban design to create informal gathering places, such as at Granary Square in London, which we saw earlier. Similarly, in discussing how the concept of gathering works spatially in everyday surroundings, Clugston argues that passive spaces, such as park benches, are just as significant as more active ones. She observes that such passive spaces are often located on the periphery near thresholds, and such edges can be used to create places where people will naturally gather, thereby building a sense of place. The library is being reconceptualized in terms of its design, facilities and activities to create new public spaces and domains that reinvent it as part of the city. It has been suggested that the public library must be seen as part of a larger urban landscape that is challenging traditional cultural institutions to respond to a new urban context. The library should form an extension of the public domain in which it sits, including interstitial spaces that act as a bridge between them, so that the public realm flows within and throughout the library's interior, seamlessly connecting it with the surrounding outdoor spaces and creating a permeability that heightens the relationship between the two. The closure and transfer of hundreds of public libraries has eroded and fragmented the public realm across scores of towns and cities in the UK. Yet the informalisation of their remaining spaces is aligning both the character of contemporary public libraries and the activities that take place within them more closely with those of public squares and parks. Just as urban development is becoming increasingly centred on establishing cities as places of experiences, so too are libraries being reconceptualised as places for meeting and gathering. Anderson posits that the library of the future is unlikely to be identifiable as a particularly distinct building type, but that it will continue to have a physical centre of gravity where people come together to gain energy from fellow human beings. Kevin Lynch describes these as the elements of urban design. Whilst many of these elements are present in the traditional design of libraries, viewing them through the lens of urban design offers new interpretations of them. Through such reinterpretations, libraries can embrace ideas from urban design and placemaking in order to enhance their role as places for human interaction. Just as elegantly designed public spaces nurture a rich and complex diversity of pluralistic and tolerant interactions, so should libraries foster the same interactions with their own interpretations of squares, parks, courtyards, arcades, promenades, streets, and cafes. As an integral part of the wider public realm, libraries can be conceptualized and designed as urban spaces. Thank you for listening to my presentation.